Not sure those slides.
Oh, great. Okay. Perfect time for me to do it. No, it's not you. It's.
Hey, Shane. There's one here, one over here.
Do I need to export it again?
All right. One other thing. I knew I was trying to think of one other thing to tell y'all. Many of you met Chad and Riley, who've been here a couple times. You might remember her. She was the pregnant one.
That is
She's
everything
no longer
that
the
is
pregnant
screen.
one. She had a little girl, and her name is
Charlotte Marie.
Charlotte Marie, thank you.
Watch it.
And The Sorrows of Young Bertha by Goethe. How you?
It must have.
Isn't that how Charlotte?
It just got messed up.
Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, they had a baby, and so as far as I know, mommy and baby are doing good, and so exciting stuff. And I saw a picture on Instagram that someone showed me, and super cutie.
And so then I push this, and then just go to the next slide.
We just asked
And
those
look,
questions. Should we
the
have
slide
questions?
here says it's
How
going
big
to
was she?
Christ
Does
is
it
the
really
next
matter?
That's the next.
Who
Or the
cares?
Christ.
Ask her in 30 years.
So that's the next one that.
How big are you?
So like.
So tonight we're looking at Philippians chapter 1, and thank you, Ashley, for getting that. I'll get that straightened out. Philippians chapter 1, and I want to start off by reminding you of a passage in Hebrews. It's pertinent in one specific way for what we're talking about tonight. Hebrews talks about goes through so many people of faith, men and women of faith that have gone before us, and it talks about how they lived and the things they did, and it says they lived by faith. They lived by faith. By faith, they did this, and so it highlights that. And then it leaves that section, and it says, "Now, since we have such a great cloud of witnesses, since so many people have gone before us and lived a life of faith, so many people have set an example for us and walked by faith through the same kinds of things that we walk through. Let us run with endurance and let us fix our eyes on Jesus." And that we have that in God's Word. We read through God's Word, and we have that. We see this great cloud of witnesses, these great examples, but we also have that in our personal lives. There are people in your life, I hope, that are that great cloud of witnesses. Those people that pour into you, that when you're around them, it encourages you to be closer to Jesus. And there's been specific people like that in my life, and they're my cloud of witnesses. One of them is a guy that was our camp pastor when I was brand new youth pastor, barely out of college, barely married. I think we were married 6 months. What's that? We were married. barely. Just for a very short time, less than a year. And we went to this camp. We went there about 11 or 12 years. And this guy is one of those people that poured into me and changed my spiritual life. His name is Wayne Barber. And he's gone home to be with the Lord since then. But I tell you about all that because I remember 30 years ago, Wayne teaching through the book of Philippians. And here's how gifted he was as a teacher and how much he encouraged me. I still remember the outline of Philippians from him teaching 30 years ago. That's pretty good, right? That's a testimony to someone who, because, how many of you honestly remember what your pastor talked about Sunday? No. Yeah. 30 years later, here I am. I can still tell you the outline of Philippians. And so, because I remember it so vividly and it was so helpful to me, I'm sharing Wayne Barber's outline of Philippians as we go through chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4. His title chapters just capture the essence of what Paul is saying. And so, tonight, as we look at chapter 1, Paul is writing from the context of trials and difficulties. And we looked at that last week. We looked at the big picture of how his life has gone since he's come to Christ. Trial after trial after trial, after hardship, after death threat, after arrest. And it was just hardship after hardship. And so he's writing from that perspective. And he's writing to people who also face those challenges. As you look in Philippians, you read that they're also facing similar challenges and circumstances. And he's telling them to have joy. He's telling them to have joy because Christ changes how we respond. Christ changes how we live. Therefore, you can have joy. So he brings a message of hope and specific purpose to these Philippians as they're hurting, as they're going through difficult circumstances. And he has one challenge. He has one challenge for them and for us. And he's essentially challenging them in this letter with this truth. The only appropriate response to the hardships and the hard people that we encounter in life is joy. That's the only appropriate response if we're walking with God. And joy comes from letting Christ permeate every part of our lives, our attitudes, our relationships, and our goals. There's one appropriate response to those situations in life. That's joy. And that's my joy. And so joy is the one appropriate response, and that only comes as Christ fills our lives and we stop trying to be in control. As we start off the book of Philippians chapter 1, verses 1 through 11, is such an encouraging note to this church. And he's lifting them up and encouraging them and reminding them of the closeness of their relationship. And he's expressing his deep love for this church. And then from that context, he starts off with this one truth. And this is the theme for chapter 1. Christ is my life. Christ is my life. That's the overriding theme here. And we need to let's jump to the next slide. I think the verse is around there too. Is that right, Maddie?
Sorry.
Okay, there we go. No, you're good. All right, so let's look at a portion of this. So the first 11 verses of this chapter are his love for the church and his relationship with them. Then let's take a look at starting in verse 12. Now, I want you to know, brother, that that my circumstances have turned out for the greater progress of the gospel, so that my imprisonment in the cause of Christ has become well known throughout the whole Praetorian Guard and to everyone else. And that most of the brethren, trusting in the Lord because of my imprisonment, have far more courage to speak the word of God without fear. Some, to be sure, are preaching Christ even from envy and strife, but some also from goodwill. The latter do it out of love, knowing that I am appointed for the defense of the gospel. The former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition rather than from pure motives, thinking to cause me distress in my imprisonment. What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed. And in this I rejoice. Yes, and I will rejoice. For I know that this will turn out for my deliverance through your prayers and the provision of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, according to my earnest expectation and hope, that I will not be put to shame in anything, but that with all boldness Christ will even now, as always, be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. For me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain. What's his focus here? It's not on moping about his circumstances. He's rejoicing in his circumstances. You catch that? Yes, I will rejoice. I'm in prison and I am celebrating. It's an awesome day because of what God's doing. Let's look at one key perspective that Paul shares. To live is Christ. And I think the next slide has Christ is my life. Yep. So two different ways to phrase that. What does that mean? Paul shares this theme throughout his writings, different churches and different people he's writing to. In here in Philippians, he says to live is Christ. Essentially, my life is Christ. In Galatians, he said, it is no longer I who lives, but Christ lives in me. It's not me living in me, it's Christ living in me. In Colossians, he says essentially Christ who is my life. So this theme of Christ dominating and permeating every part of our lives is a recurring theme for him. Paul's saying an exchange has taken place. That passage in Galatians 2, chapter 2, verse 20, it says, it is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. There's an exchange that's taken place. You came to Christ, and it's no longer you, but Christ living in you. Paul's saying, it looks like me on the outside, but it's Christ living through me. Yeah, it's still my body, it's still my face, but it's Christ living through me, calling the shots, changing my attitudes, forming who I am, who I'm becoming. Christ lives in me. Christ is my life is how Wayne summed this up. And there's another part of it that we'll look at in just a minute. But let's take a look at what that really means. We actually sang about it a couple times tonight. We said, in that first song, we said, I was listening to the lyrics, and it's like, we live for you. That's essentially this, isn't it? We live for you. Second song, Christ alone. Not me, but Christ alone. So what does it mean that Christ is my life? What does that look like? Did any of you all ever have a puppet when you're growing up? Sometimes, did you ever make them in Sunday school or something like that? You take a paper bag and you glue the little eyes on it.
My brother and I purchased marionette puppets from the state fair. And then
Older memories, right?
Yeah.
And so a puppet. Think of that puppet. It's probably no longer laying in your room. But if it were laying in your room, it wouldn't just be laying in your room right now, right? It would be laying there, and when you're a little 8-year-old you go into your room and you decide you want to play with a puppet, and you put your hand up inside the puppet. The puppet has no life until it has you in it. And then you are directing everything it does. The life of the puppet is you, right? Christ is my life. It's no longer me living, but Christ living in me. Are you letting your actions and decisions come from Christ that's in you? Can you say it's no longer I who lives, but Christ lives in me? So here's how Wayne finished out this description. Because where is Paul when he's writing this? What's kind of the theme of what he's writing? He's talking about how one circumstance in his life impacts him. What's that one circumstance? Prison, right? Okay, so this whole chapter is in the context of prison and joy in prison. And look what Christ is doing through my imprisonment. So here's the rest of Wayne's title for chapter 1. Christ is my life. Prisons don't intimidate. Prisons don't intimidate. In our perspective, chains limit us. Prison walls steal our freedom. Those things are a source of shame. If the police came and handcuffed you and took you off, you'd be embarrassed that your friends saw, they saw that. It would be a point of shame for you to say, yes, I've humiliating. I was in prison. But Paul's saying prisons for the cause of Christ don't intimidate. That doesn't scare me. It doesn't cause me to change my behavior. Paul was in prison when he wrote this letter. And why was he in prison? Because of the gospel. Not because of something wrong he did. He was in prison for the gospel. So what was the goal? So he's in prison for the gospel. So let's think of this from the other side. Think through this with me. What was the goal of those who put him in prison? Shut up, okay? Shut up about what? The gospel. Stop talking about Jesus. And so Paul said, okay, you got me. Right? No, not at all. He said, it's no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. Christ is my life. Prisons don't intimidate me. Look again at verses, well, no, not yet. Right? Yeah, let's look at 12 through 14 again. Yep. Now, I want you to, so we just read this, but I want to read it again in light of this. Prisons don't intimidate me. Look at Paul's perspective on prison. Now, I want you to know, brethren, that my circumstances have turned out for the greater progress of the gospel, so that my imprisonment in the cause of Christ has become well known throughout the whole Praetorian Guard and to everyone else. And that most of the brethren, trusting in the Lord because of my imprisonment, have far more courage to speak the word of God without fear. So, why did their plan backfire? They put Paul in prison to shut him up. They put Paul in prison to shut down the gospel. Their plan clearly backfired. Why did it backfire?
Cut off one head, two more take its place.
Okay.
That's Hydra.
Okay. If someone realizes that people are willing to, suffer for this, then that means it's an ideology worth believing. That's one of the reasons that Christianity skyrocketed during the days of the Roman Empire, because it's so heavily
persecuted and persecution.
He had a good attitude about it.
Okay. So what we're focusing on right here is his response to it. But overall persecution does cause a deeper level of commitment. It does bring that to people. But in this context, his perspective on prison wasn't, oh, I've lost, I've been shut down, I have to stop. It was new setting, new surroundings. Okay, never been here before.
Something, right?
Yeah. Let's keep up the good work. Can't imprison the gospel. You can't shut it down. What they didn't realize is the gospel or Christ is Paul's life. And that's what they didn't realize when they arrested him. That's what they didn't realize when they arrested Peter and John in the book of Acts. They didn't realize that Christ was their life. They outright said, tell us, do you want us to obey you or God? They told these religious leaders that. Tell us who it's better to obey. What are your thoughts on that? Well, how are they supposed to answer that one? You can't shut the gospel down. Paul said, I'll continue to live for Christ. I'm going to share the gospel even in prison. What are you going to do if I keep doing it? Arrest me? I'm already in jail. You're going to double arrest me? How does that work? I don't get it. These circumstances would shut a lot of people down, didn't shut all down. So what's the progress that came from his imprisonment? Look at verse 12. The greater progress of the gospel, right? The gospel has expanded, the gospel has grown. Look at verse 13. The gospel has been shared with the whole Praetorian Guard. Throughout the whole Praetorian Guard. Verse 14 tells us that others had courage and hope because of his imprisonment, because of his attitude and the way that he shared the gospel. One of Paul's life's goals was, his ministry goals was, someday I want to go to Rome. Someday I want to go to Rome and I want to take the gospel to Rome. I want to preach in Rome, and that was his heart. He told different groups that, and he knew he could be used by God in that setting. And if God would use him in that setting in Rome, there was a chance the gospel would really spread, because Rome was kind of the mega city of the day. It was kind of the center of all culture in that day, and kind of centrally located. So everything could go out from Rome. And so Paul's like, Lord, if you just give me the chance, I want to go preach in Rome. Look at these couple verses, Acts 19:21. Now, after these things were finished, Paul purposed in the Spirit to go to Jerusalem, after he had passed through Macedonia and Achaia, saying, after I've been in Jerusalem, I must also see Rome. Now, he's not talking about go to Rome and see it on vacation. He's talking about going to share the gospel. I must go to Rome to minister. Look at Romans 1:15. He's writing to this group of believers in Rome, and he says, so for my part, I am eager to preach the gospel to you also who are in Rome. I'm eager to come to you. I want to preach the gospel to you. I want to see you face to face. I want to help you. And so, likely, the Bible doesn't tell us this, but I would guess Paul probably imagined himself making a trip there with Silas or Timothy or someone. They're making a trip to Rome. Okay, they come walking into the city, and they find someone who's responsive to the gospel. They find that one person in the first little bit that they're there, and they reach out to that person, and that family then takes them in and says, you come stay with us. We want to learn more about what you have to say, and we want to help because we understand, and it makes sense to us what you're saying, these things about Jesus. And so I would imagine Paul thinking, okay, now let's get some of your friends together. Who do you know? Who else can I talk to? Where can I go to talk with people? And more people come to know Christ. And then they form a church. And Paul says, you guys are doing great. This church is off and running. I'm going to go somewhere else. You guys keep up the good work. And that was in Paul's mind. But in God's mind, Paul had the right target, didn't he? He was in tune with where the Holy Spirit wanted him to go, Rome. The way he got there, his accommodations were slightly different, because this book of Philippians is written from a jail cell in Rome. So yes, Paul made it to Rome, but it just looked a little different. He didn't go to Rome as a preacher. He went as a prisoner. But they couldn't shut the gospel down. There's a really good book I got years ago. It's a book compiled by some, I don't know how many there are of DC Pop. The book is called Jesus Friends. The book is about people who have given up their lives. People who have made huge sacrifices for the cause of the gospel. And it's stories throughout history, from the first century all the way up to modern times. And they stood for Jesus no matter what. And they responded to whatever God was doing in their life no matter what. There's a story in there that I love. It's about a guy named Francisco, Peru. And like Paul, he had this burden. God had put a very specific burden on Francisco's heart. Like Paul said, Rome, I can't get Rome out of my head. Francisco said, God, I know you're calling me to reach out to this group of terrorists.
When was this?
1990. And there's a group of communist terrorists that were just causing havoc in the capital city.
Shining Liberation, right?
The
Shining Liberation. I think that's the
Sandinistas. Is my memory serves. But so he knew that was what God was calling him to do. So he had prepared himself. He had studied. Like, okay, how can I reach them? What will I say to them when I meet them? And he prepared himself. But just couldn't find the opportunity. One day as he was walking through town, just on an errand, as he was walking past this government building, a car sped by, shot a mortar into the government building, and the car disappeared, sped away. The police show up, of course, because there's been an explosion at a government building from these terrorists, and they just start arresting people. Francisco is one of the ones that gets arrested. He was arrested as a possible terrorist, and he was taken to the area where they kept all the terrorists. He didn't waste any time. He realized, good job, God. I didn't know how to finish that. Now they can't get away. We're all in jail together. I'm not supposed to be here. I didn't do anything. But I'm with them. He didn't waste any time. God gave him the opportunity. He sat in that jail cell for 1 year waiting for his trial. Waiting to demonstrate the fact that he was innocent. But in that time, 60 men and women in that terrorist group. Christ. Before he left, a church was formed in that prison from those people who were going to be there for a long time. They were guilty. But God can still reach them. God can still work in them. Francisco essentially said, Christ is my life. Prisons don't. So Paul is sitting in jail in Rome. And in Rome, in that day, what they would do is a prisoner wasn't just locked up and left. A prisoner was chained to a guard to keep them secure. They would go in 6-hour shifts. You talk about a boring job. If you want to go sit next to someone who's like some accused murderer or something like that, and you have to sit there chained to them all day to keep them from escaping, I mean, I guess you could read and stuff, but...
You haven't been on order taker with only 2 people.
So how does Paul take this information? Paul's processing. God's given me this burden, and God's given me this opportunity. Paul flipped around the context of the whole situation. I'm not chained to them. They're chained to me. I have a captive audience for 6 hours straight, and I'm going to share the gospel with them. I'm going to share the love of Jesus Christ with them. Every single one of them that comes through here. What was that verse about the whole Praetorian Guard? It's reached the whole Praetorian Guard because Paul said, yeah, I'm in chains. Yeah, I'm stuck in prison. But Christ is my life, and I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that because I can do something here. I don't have to shut down. I can still serve the Lord. So Paul flipped his perspective. I'm not chained. They're chained to me. What about us? We flip our perspective. I'm not stuck in a challenging work situation. I'm not stuck in a difficult family circumstance. They're stuck dealing with Christ flowing through me. They are the ones that are going to experience the whole time that we're together. They're going to experience Christ in me. They're going to see what it looks like for someone to live like Christ is their life. So that's not all the mindset we read about in Philippians. That's not the end of it. That's kind of the heart of it. So essentially, Paul's perspective, and he said it 3 different ways in 3 different letters. Christ is my life. For me to live is Christ. No longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. Sometimes I think we're tempted to sell ourselves short and live a mediocre Christian life. What can I get by with as a follower of Christ? Rather than how can I make Christ my life? Excuse me. So he said, prisons don't intimidate me. But at the end of the chapter, essentially he gives this charge to the Philippians, and it kind of comes across to me as, you know what, prisons don't intimidate me, they shouldn't intimidate you as well. The difficulties that you face in your following of Christ, the challenges that you come across because you're walking with Christ, don't let them stop you. Let's look at the challenge he gives to the Philippians and to us. Let's jump down to verse 27. Only conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel, so that whether I come and see you or remain absent, I will hear of you that you are standing firm in one spirit and with one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel. And in no way alarmed by your opponents, which is a sign of destruction for them, but of salvation for you, and that too from God. For to you it has been granted for Christ's sake, not only to believe, but also to suffer for his sake, experiencing the same conflict which you saw in me, and now hear. Y'all see any charges in there? I hope you do. I hope you look at that and you say, ooh, that's a call to action right there. Paul lays out a couple of very significant ones. There's actually more than I'm going to touch on here, but a couple of significant ones. What does it mean for me and for you to say Christ is my life? How does that look in my life? Let's look at these verses. He says, here's one thing that's important: a consistent walk with God. A consistent walk with God. Look what he says. Conduct yourselves in a manner worthy of the gospel. Live worthy of the gospel. Is your life, are your priorities, are your interactions, are they living up to the greatness of the gospel? Are they on the same par as that? Or do you sell yourself short? Do you cut it off before that and take a shortcut? You live in such a way that it makes sense to someone else watching you. That if you said that sentence, Christ is my life, they'd be like, I get it, yeah, I see that. I can see that in you. Whether they're a Christian or not. They would say, I see that. Your life has to match up to what you proclaim. If Christ is your life should be different. Your life should be changed. What's another charge that he gives us? Another one that will help us be able to say, Christ is my life. Look down to the end of verse 27. Is that it? Yeah, 27. I hear of you that you are standing firm in one spirit, with one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel. What are the action words there? Striving, standing firm. Okay, so striving, standing firm. Okay, so let's talk about standing firm there. Standing firm. There's never any reason for any of us to compromise on what God says is an absolute. There's never any reason for us to try to water that down, to fit in, be acceptable. We need to stand firm in. Don't back down from it. Don't be ashamed of it. But he also tells us to continue striving. Continue striving.
Experiencing the same conflict as me.
Yep. So don't be, and what does he say? Don't be alarmed, right? In no way be alarmed by your opponents. Don't be surprised that you're going to face some of these challenges. Guess what, guys? This isn't because you became a Christian, life is going to be hard. Life is hard. It's just hard for different reasons. It's hard, but we have hope. Don't be surprised that life is going to be full of challenges. When you trust Christ, when you start walking with Christ, guess what? The difficult people in your life are still going to be there. God doesn't put you in a bubble. Guess what? The health challenges that you had or your family member had are still going to be there. But we just have a new way to approach it. So don't be surprised that we have those challenges and those struggles and those hardships like Paul had. Don't be surprised at that. But what does it mean to strive? I love that word because it's on me. It's up to me what am I going to do about it? Am I going to strive? Am I going to work hard? Am I going to be intentional? Am I going to be persistent in my walk? He says, stand firm. So first we have to know the truth. But then striving in our walk with Christ. Working at it. No one accidentally ever fell into an awesome relationship with God. It's not the default of life. It's not going to happen by accident. You wake up one day and say, whoa, look how close I am to God today. You're going to have to work at it. You're going to have to push yourself. It's like anything else. If it's something you desire, you will make it a priority. You will push to make it happen and to see it happen. So he gives us this call. Live a consistent life. A godly life. Stand firm in the truth. Work hard at it. I have two things for you. First one. I want you to think about this. How would you honestly finish Paul's sentence? For me to live is, what's really that driver in your life? What is challenging you, motivating you, pushing you, giving you hope? I want you to take some time this week and honestly think about that question. For me to live is, what is my life? That's the right answer, and hopefully it's our answer, right? And if not, if we fill that in with something else, how do you finish that sentence? For me, to live is to get a great career. How do you finish that sentence? For me to live is to get a great career. For me to die is to get a promotion for someone else now that I'm out of that position. Where's the hope in that, right? For me, to live is to make a lot of money. Find a wife. For me to die is to create a widow.
But what if she dies first?
Well, then you're the winner.
What a word.
Clearly.
Secondly, here's the second one. What circumstance in your life could God completely reverse if you change your perspective? What circumstance in your life could God completely flip around? Think about Paul's jail sentence. That's supposed to shut him down. That's supposed to take him out of circulation and make it impossible for him to do anything. But what did it do? It furthered the gospel more than he could have done anything, more than anything else he could have done. Because his perspective changed. What circumstance in your life is God completely reversed? You can change your perspective. Think of that situation that is overwhelming you. God, how is that an opportunity? How is that something you can work through? How is that something where you can be glorified, where I will grow, where I can make an impact on others? I love my roommate from college, Jimmy is his name. He's started a ministry in Indianapolis. And I probably had more fun that year of college than any other year. Right? But a God relationship, God. Right now, as we're talking, he's battling cancer, and he's doing radiation treatment for cancer. If any of y'all know me, you know I go on Facebook once every 3 weeks or so, whether I need to or not, kind of thing, or on social media altogether, probably. I just don't bother with it too much. But tonight I was looking at something. I'm like, let me look on Facebook. And the first or second post that popped up was a post from him today. He's in the hospital with his wife, just going in for treatment, not admitted. But they're there in their masks and everything because they're in the hospital in Indiana. He's undergoing cancer treatment too. But here's what he wrote. I told the folks in radiology that they must need Jesus to send us their way really badly. They must really need Jesus because he keeps putting me in your life. You know what you get when you get me? You get Jesus. You get to hear about Jesus. You get to hear about what Jesus is doing in my life. You don't get to hear me whine about cancer. You don't get to hear me tell you, I'm that uncomfortable. I responded to his post. I said, Paul phrased it this way. To live is Christ. A living, breathing example of what it means to take that circumstance and let God use it for something bigger. Something we would moan about, something that we would whine about. And let God get work in that circumstance. Christ is my life. Prisons. Let's pray. Lord, I thank you that you give us this perspective, that you help us be able to have this insight into Paul's life, his ministry, his heart for you, God. God, I just ask you, give us that same heart, give us that same power. Father, I lift Jimmy before you right now as he's undergoing these treatments. Pray that you'll keep him strong. Pray that you'll heal his body. But even more so than that, I know it's desire to hear of your word. Because you, Jimmy's life, just like you were Paul's life, it's like, so God, that you work that in us. Amen.